which is, or I should say, hello. If I include this part, hello, everyone, welcome. Okay, so, which is the, you had mentioned in the chat, is the Ouroboros the shadow of the of Abraxas? And I thought, I think we might be able to have an interesting conversation about that.
Okay.
You know, do you want to hear my thoughts first, or do you want to present your kind of what you've been thinking about it today?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really think much of it. I just saw what they were saying in the chat about the anti-Abraxas and the shadow of Abraxas, and looking at the cosmogram or the Abraxan cosmogram, you have the source of light is behind Abraxas, and then in front and below Abraxas is the Ouroboros where the shadow would be cast. And there's also the fact that Abraxas is the open circle with the two snake heads, but they don't come around on each other, versus the Ouroboros, which is a closed loop that's eating itself.
Okay, yeah. Or wait, you gotta say that last part again. The Abraxas is the open circle?
Yeah, with the two serpents that come up on either side, but they don't close the loop, whereas the Ouroboros is just a closed circle.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, so I guess to give my thoughts, or yeah, about that, firstly, that's interesting. The idea of Da'ath with the, is that kind of what you're thinking there in terms of the light, the cruciform halo and the shadow?
Yeah, and also the eclipse that's above and behind it.
Yeah. So my kind of thinking was a bit contrarian, to be honest. I was thinking, because somebody had responded after saying a bunch of things the artifacts is evil and the Ouroboros is evil, and I was just thinking, because I've been thinking about this idea where it's I posted that conversation with Mr. Neil Daedalus a while ago called The Good Artifacts, and the whole idea was that God created this being with almost a function, how in the book of Job it says behold Leviathan and all of his and also even at the end of the book of Leviathan, the book of Job, they have Job basically becomes one with Leviathan. I'm pretty sure they eat the flesh, and I've also heard people talk about an abode aspect where we reside.
Yeah. And now I hope Kezi is able to stay. Hello.
Hey.
That's amazing, Sherry. That helps me understand a lot. I'm going to think about that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. The only thing I would...
They are covered in many layers of reality, which seem to us as miraculous or seem to us as not natural when they make their, when they surface, so to speak. Hey, Jed.
Hey.
Hi, Jedediah.
Good morning.
This kind of makes me think about the garments of skin again, Pezzy, because my understanding is not, I would rather keep it mythological and call it Leviathan. Because I think Leviathan represents this complex dynamical system under which we have to abide, right? We find our abode underneath of it, within the tabernacle. This is where we tabernacle, under it, literally, in the world. We are under that burden of this complex dynamical system. And sometimes, there's that those verses in Job where it talks about eating Leviathan too, right? So not only are you living underneath of it, but you're also partaking, consuming it. This is, to me, this is very profound, actually. Very profound. I love it. It says more to me than any other conversation you could have around it, than the whole Doors of the Sea that I read from David Bentley Hart.
I love that book.
I know you do.
Where we reside. So something about this idea where maybe like
I mean, there's also the Leviathan. If you look at the verses, it's two different kinds of snakes. One is has this metal back. One is breathing fire. There's also a whole female and male version of the Leviathan. But specifically, the battle between the behemoth and the Leviathan, the interpretation I appreciate the most is that the Leviathan should be seen as sort of unchecked nature, or like the tov vavohu. And our job is, and this is something that many religious people are scared of, is to look at nature not as something that we necessarily need to transcend, but rather something that we need to upgrade and sanctify, right? We have it in a very small version anytime we eat something, right? I'm taking an apple and I'm eating it, and I'm then basically I am sanctifying and elevating all those elements of that apple through a human and what I could do with it, right? Same thing with the animal, if I'm doing it properly, right? The hunter is actually there and he hunts and it's going to be for the next year. In Judaism, we understand that would be like the animal is willing to die for that purpose, because that is like sort of like a noble cause, sort of the circle of life. And when we look at the Leviathan and at nature in general, we have to realize how all elements of nature need to ultimately be elevated. And then it goes from holy to holy of holies. And that's, in a certain sense, one interpretation of the Leviathan. But again, we could go very deep into that concept.
like the shadow, like I don't know, obviously the thought with the shadow is that it's easy to think that it's like all bad, but the shadow can also have good qualities.
At the end of Job becoming a Leviathan, Jonah being swallowed by the Leviathan, and then it's in the belly of the whale that he remembers the holy place. It's in the belly of the whale he remembers God. And there's this connection between him and God that is renewed that wasn't available anywhere else. Like he left his country, he was on the ship, he was in the storm, he was thrown into the sea, but it was in the belly of Leviathan. So we have becoming Leviathan, we have in the belly of Leviathan, and then we have the picture of Jesus walking on the water, which is walking on Leviathan. I want to avoid just being like, well, everyone should just jump off the fixed land and into the crazy sea, and we should all be Leviathans. And like, that's not the thing either.
Each in its own time, I think.
Huh?
I think each in its own time, or like each according to the dictates of its own conscience. I mean, it can't be, no, you can't, the way to teach swimming lessons isn't to just throw everybody into the water at the same time. Chuck you in the ocean, Listen, at some point you have to learn how to swim, so we're just gonna chuck you in the ocean. Because like there'll be people that drown.
Yeah, that's a disaster.
Because they're not ready.
Yeah, what you want to have is swimming lessons, not throw everyone or a flood. Yeah. You don't want a flood, you want swimming lessons.
Listen.
I mean, you said something like, we always need a little bit of Leviathan.
Yeah, so the biblical Leviathan.
So it's almost like this idea that I kind of think another way of thinking about it would be in terms of this idea of reincarnation, or like or just like creation, such that like the Ouroboros would be like the world of creation, like perhaps even like fallen creation, but such that that still has a function in like God's ultimate plan, such that maybe even one might even be able to suggest that perhaps we choose to enter the closed circle because ultimately that's like productive for us, like we choose to be born or something into the world of time, even though it's like associated with death and stuff.
It's related to sleep.
Yeah, I definitely didn't mean to imply that the shadow of Abraxas would be evil. It's just the opposite is what I was thinking. Like even Abraxas in itself, I don't think is totally in its right mind, which is why I'm skeptical of the cruciform being on its head. But nonetheless, also the artifacts, I definitely don't think the artifacts is evil either. I think the artifacts is just natural selection, if anything, or it's like that function which separates the wheat from the chaff. So I think we're definitely on the same page there. I don't think I don't think anything is evil to begin with, anyways, since God is the ultimate creator. So
Heard that. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like there's a lot of like there's a lot of hate on the old Ouroboros. But at the
yeah,
same
lots of
time,
hate on
like
the
it is,
artifacts too.
you know, like the artifacts is, you know, it's not that like we would want to be, you know, it's still kind of an opposing enemy type thing, but it's like, you know, love thy enemy, right?
Right,
And
right.
so yeah. Um
A biblical Leviathan order would be the behemoth. And now we are told that at the end, you know, at the eschaton, so to speak, the behemoth and the Leviathan, they fight with each other. And the righteous get to observe this battle. And ultimately, after the Leviathan is killed, they sit and have a meal in a tent built, made out of the Leviathan's skin. And that is to show that, like, now that it's been vanquished, order can be set upon this sort of tova vohu nature, and it could be elevated. And that's why the righteous are enjoying that, because they no longer feel that tension that we feel today between the behemoth and the Leviathan.
but then okay, I lost my train of thought. I had something I was gonna say there. Um
I
the
guess with the Ouroboros hate, at least on my side, not that I hate it, but I definitely don't see the Ouroboros as like a holy image. I think it's too relatable to the serpent or the adversary to be considered like something that we should point towards as some sort of like image of a goal.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not a fan of, although in the way that I described before, like I think there might be a way where it's like we choose to engage in this way. But yeah, I would definitely agree, like that you don't want to be like, you know, like yeah. I don't know. I think of it kind of similar to like Antichrist. It's like it's a useful category and it like has a place in the story, but it's
Right
not.
at the bottom.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, um. What was I gonna say? I fucking hate when I forget what I was gonna
Yeah.
say, dude. It always happens, and then I get conscious about a recording. It just it's a spiral. But I don't know.
Yeah, the
And you know what I
Ouroboros.
think that is? You know what I think that is? I think it's because YouTube evolved out of mainstream media and movies and radio, where dead air is no good, all right?
Mhm.
And we can't just sit. I hate this. I fucking hate this because this is where we meet each other in the silence, in the doing things together where we'll not, you know, in the intervals, the temporality of engagement. And that's just like, you know, here we like, you know, if we just sat in silence for the next minute, that'd be very taboo, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, no one's gonna watch this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Immediately they hit the double tap. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe I'll just rebel and take a minute to try and remember what I was gonna say. But um
I'll rap more about Ouroboros.
This has been a perpetual bane of all of my group chats. I'm a big voice memo person, and I'll get in signal chats where everybody else is text and it's just walls of text and text and text.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I don't know who you must have a computer-based job to be able to just sit there and read that much text all day. I can't sit in front of a screen that much. I got shit to do.
Yeah, for real. It, you know, the text reframes your consciousness, but you know, to avoid the deep ramble in that regard, like, yeah, I definitely feel that. Like, I did that just the other day. I'm in a group chat and I said, "Hey, anybody want to do a call?" You know,
Yeah.
and then we did a call and recorded it, and I'm gonna post it in the group chat later.
Oh, sweet.
I think it's interesting that you said that you see a lot of Ouroboros hate, because I see a lot of like glorification of the Ouroboros as sort of like this ultimate symbol of what reality is, as if it's a symbol of life in rebirth,
Yeah.
which I think is just like off the money. It looks like a symbol of more like eternal death, just like, you know, the gaping mouth of hell that can never be filled.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
that
it's a pathetic image, really. It's very akin to like the image of a man sucking off himself.
yeah. Yeah.
It's the libidinal pursuit of the lack.
Yeah.
2 weeks, things will be calm. But I don't know that they are. I think it's almost learning to walk on water. You either learn to be okay with the busyness, or you just live in the perpetual hell of the Protestant work ethic.
You know, that reminds me of when you were talking with Jess about Leviathan in terms of walking on the water, because that's the same image, right? Is walking on Leviathan.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I had written down, because that conversation that I just recorded, I was talking about the Ouroboros in that quite a bit. So I was thinking maybe, you know, poking you, see if you had anything else to say. You could almost think about like the work cycle, or like the next week will be better as this eternal recurrence of Leviathan, modern job lifestyle.
It's a pathetic image, really.
Firstly, that reminded me of what I was going to say. Very glad about that. And also, I think there's something about like the distinction between the open and the closed circle, which is like that they are the same, like in a way. Like I've never really thought about like how you mentioned the 2 snakes as like the open circle. I more so think about it as like the circle always thinks that it's closed, except it can, like, that path between Yesod and Tifereth is like
to wrap up your Ouroboros thing is it's kind of this orthodox idea of everything is the light of God, is the light of creation, and you're either oriented in harmony with that, which feels like fire as or trial or suffering, or as purification, because you're aligned with it. It's like the sword that takes on the aspect of the fire, so like it doesn't stop being a sword, but it's the fire and the light is added to the sword, so it's like the glowing sword. Or you can be in opposition to that, where it melts you away and destroys you. And so like all that exists is the light of creation, is the light of God. You know, every good gift comes down from the Father of heavenly lights, who doesn't change like shifting shadows, James. But like if you are opposed to that, reality feels like hell. But if you are aligned to that and accepting of it, and if you receive it as a gift, it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean that it's not painful, but it strengthens you.
Yeah.
And it transforms you into something that you never thought you were. And so like, I think there's one reality. I really do think there's one reality. And so it's either in your alignment to that reality or your opposition to that reality. So in that sense, when I say nothing changes and everything changes, if all of humanity came into alignment with reality, we would live in the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
It would be the kingdom of God, but nothing would change.
Yeah. Yeah, and that connects
but everything would.
Yeah. Yeah, and that connects with what you were saying about the body and the animal instincts, such that like animals don't like sin in the way that we can.
Yeah.
Like that kind of, like that's the connection.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a short that you posted about like dual processing and like politics, and how from one axis it looks like they're in contrary, but if you look at it from above, they're in harmony, like to turn the wheel.
Imagine you had a wheel set on a central axis and you needed to turn it in a clockwise manner, very much like what we have here. Now, you could set up one person on one side of the wheel to push it in a clockwise manner, but you'd be doubly helped if you set up another person on the other part of the wheel pushing in a clockwise manner as well. Now, if you take the wheel away and you just look at what's going on top down, it looks like these two forces are actually acting against each other. Notice how they're going in opposite directions. But because of the way a wheel works, these are actually supporting and helping one another. This is called opponent processing, when you have two mechanisms that work against each other but are actually helping each other by virtue of the fact that they're working against one another. Here's the question I want to ask you. If I was to remove the wheel in the center, delete it entirely, and I was to shift this picture from 2 dimensions into 1 dimension, what would this actually look like? Well, what you would get is this. You would get 2 forces that look like they're acting against one another. Because you've taken one of the dimensions out, you have actually led to 2 forces that are in opposition to one another. We have plenty of examples of this in our society, and in a one-dimensional world, these 2 act in opposition to one another. Here's a very important concept for us to understand. When dimensions are removed, opponent processing looks like tribalism. Instead, I am advocating for realism from a both and perspective. What do I want to do? Let's add back in the second dimension. Rather than talking about everything one-dimensionally.
Harmony. And like if you take a spring, for instance, which is like this helix shape, if you look at it down the barrel, it's a closed circle. But from the side, from profile, it's a spiral.
Dude, okay, so my brain just freaking blew up with a billion, my noose with a billion things to say, but I want to say the other thing before I lose it, which was that
I see the Buddha before Christ, again, 600 years before Christ, kind of seeing the wheel of becoming, right? The wheel of becoming, we got to liberate ourselves from this wheel of becoming. And I thought, it's too bad that he couldn't just turn himself just a little bit like this and see that behind what he thought was a wheel was a spiral of unfolding evolutionary consciousness. Because that's really what was there.
Before I lose it, which was that you were saying about how no evil and stuff. Did you see I say my as if I'm some annoying ass person,
The advent of the sacred is not our individual or conceptual responses. It is the response of ultimate reality to the meaning crisis. And that is deeply, deeply important to people. People are starving, right? Scarcity mentality, deeply starving. And when we're in scarcity mentality, we're rigid, we're short-term, we're impulsive, we're irrational, we're egocentric. People are seeing that is ripping the world apart. People want release from that. The energy is, do you want release from that? And do you want religio? Do you want the abundant life? People are energized by this precisely because it is a salvation, right? It is a healing of the meaning crisis, and it is also spiritual food that is growing them up in ways that they could not have done before.
Did you see my
Douglas Harding in The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth? He talks about how we can't come into the place where we can make contact with God as so long as we claim ownership of even one particle for ourselves. And Bulgakov, he actually distinguishes that there is a self-love that is proper and godly, and it's a self-love that does not claim ownership. He points to the same thing that Harding does, that it's a self-love that does not claim ownership of anything. So to me, the idea of spiritual poverty is that you don't claim ownership of anything and you accept everything as gift. And so you are able to give away freely and to receive what is given to you in the proper spirit as gift as well.
Did you see the video I posted called Eurythmy and Evil?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I really think you would like that one. It's talking a lot about evil and stuff, and that's been like a thread in our conversation since we first started talking. This idea of like the reality of evil and stuff, and that kind of also connects in now talking about the looking at the open circle from different angles, which is that image. God, so much going on. So in that video, Eurythmy and Evil, one of the clips that I included was from my conversation with Formscapes, where we were talking about his logo on the Cosmogram. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that one.
Okay, yeah. So that, when you talked about the spring, it just reminded me of that, because I think that's the next evolution of the cosmogram, or that there's something to be gleaned in that respect. Um, insofar as if you think about the Ouroboros as flat, I think that also can work in some sense, where you have like the world like flatland, almost like a dimensionality thing, where it's like this is the world of almost like the maze, where you have the maze and then the vertical, like that the way out of the maze is at the center of the maze, right? And um and the way I think about it is kind of like the Taijitu spinning, or like even a globe perhaps that's held by the two snakes, and like you know that globe where it's like the yin yang, but it's like a globe at the same time. So I don't know, something about that, and then how the line that's created might do like a spin thing around the shining void at the top. I get a little excited. I have to be careful here. But
So I think I caught something that's related to what you're getting at. Like, are you familiar with the chart from A Shared Story?
yes,
My take is that that's the same cosmogram as Griffin's, but instead of in profile, it's from the bottom up. It's like a cross section of the tree of life.
that sounds very extremely interesting to me. And I think that you might be correct. I'm still haven't, I actually have plans to, like tentative plans in the works to talk with that guy. But
That's awesome, dude. Yeah,
yeah.
what'd you think of his stuff, man? It's mind blowing that there's just like
I've only watched a couple of the videos though. Like I basically, I watched like one
I
or two.
watched them all, and then I watched them all in Spanish, and then I watched them all again, bro. Like,
No, yeah. I mean, I basically got the vibe. I was like, yes, this is, like almost like I didn't even have to watch them. I was like, this is
right, yeah, okay,
but
understandable.
but I very much intend to watch them. I've just had like
Hmm.
my mind, and I want to be like in the right headspace when I engage with them. And that's the same case with Griffin's articles actually, is that I'm way behind on the articles because I feel like I'm not situated to like be receptive to them. At the moment, just had a lot going on and such.
Funny. For
Um,
on my end, it's like if I see one of those guys post something, I stop everything I'm
yeah,
doing.
yeah, I definitely have that feeling as well, especially when it comes to videos. Like,
Mm.
but yeah, so I intend to watch those, and I plan to hopefully talk with him about this. Uh, but yeah, that's an interesting thought, how it might be like from this other perspective.
Angle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to try and connect it so this doesn't seem like a totally incoherent ramble, like there was something about that and the I don't know, the whole thing about the open versus the closed circle and like that connecting point is so numinous to me. Like I just kind of stumble for words, to be honest. But so I don't know exactly what to say there, but really that's just kind of the thing that I was hoping to, or that's like a thought that comes to mind is something I would love to bring up with you, is like that whole connection there with the Formscapes logo and the and even that, and like this idea of it maybe being flat with like the some sort of rotating thing that would fit with this hourglass image as
Mm.
well. And I know that Griffin has talked about hourglass
Yeah,
structures.
and then there's your image of the fool hung on the cross with
Yeah.
the spiral around.
Yes.
Exactly, upside down. And that's to me another image of the hangman, right?
One of the weird things about this poetic thing that is Genesis is that it talks about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. But there's one tree in the garden, at the center of the garden. So it talks about two trees, but there's one tree at the center. And so he says the way that he understands that then is there's this tree and there's this tree. So it's the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is and this is related to his idea of the fall.
Yeah. So basically all that I mean to say here is that I think there's something going on there, and I'm like really you know, like the pieces are kind of clicking together gradually, and I'm hoping that either somebody else will kind of take up the, you know, the task of figuring out how to kind of work it all together.
Mm.
Because that's basically my idea, is like without any shade at Griffin whatsoever, like I basically just think that the cosmogram, that there's more to be gleaned from it. I also have other things that like are on my mind with regard to like, you know, what's next and what might be calling us and what perhaps would
Right.
be
How
best.
can we move the plot forward is
Yeah,
how I
yeah,
frame it.
but in terms of the cosmogram, like that's, you know, I definitely think there's more kind of to be gleaned in this respect. It's very interesting.
I feel like I just had like a massive insight into your mind for a moment. It's like I'm finally, I feel like I'm starting to catch on that like the questions you're asking are not defined. But it's like they're real. Like it's a legitimate question, like the thing that we seek for in our conversations and that you're particularly directed towards. It's not even something that I can like put into words, but for a second I literally saw it. Like I was like, oh, I'm finally on the same page as Jonathan. I know I like
all the stuff about Leviathan and
yeah.
like the garments of skin is connected with Leviathan, and the garments of skin is technology, and that's kind of how I think about technology being redeemed in the end, is like through this transfiguration of the garments into garments of light, such that they are like the New Jerusalem. It's the technical giving glory to the natural in the middle and almost bringing it out, like adding to it, and I think that's connected with art in some way, because it's like using technology to reveal the glory that is in, or something. But
it's just interesting how you see now I'm stumbling for words because I'm like getting in your headspace. Oh no.
my bad. Yeah.
All right, I'm resetting. All right. So the Formscapes Jonathan collab.
Yeah. Wait, let me say one thing. Let me say one thing about that, which is that is how I feel. You know, it's like that there's this amorphous insight that's like multifaceted and very important. And I'm like constantly trying to track and get a better view of it and like figure out how to, you know, and it's like it's there and it's like I kind of can talk about it from different angles, but it's hard to kind of address in its suchness and its totality because it's very overwhelming to me. And it's largely about this kind of story, you know, as you mentioned, that includes the cosmogram, but also other things like, as I've talked about, this whole idea of kind of a new way of communicating.
I think it's because I'm high. I think it's because it's the Delta 9, bro.
Could be that. Yeah, it definitely contributes to my thinking. You know, that
you know,
very often high.
You just gave me another like image, a vision, I guess. Like this thing that you're describing is on the other side of some sort of like hyperdimensional membrane. And I felt it like look at me once. Like I remember this imagery from when I was on my first site visit in New Orleans, and I was alone in my hotel room, and I felt like there was this massive eye like pressed up against this membrane looking down at me through my ceiling, like as if I was being observed. Like I felt like some sort of small zoo animal. Well, that's putting it kind of darkly. I didn't feel threatened, but it was just this. Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't get as much of the like kind of the animate sense of like
we're using technique, techne. This is all language that comes from Elul, and I think I've always been of the thought it's like, well, if I just put the good intentions into technique or technology, then we can like use it for good. But Elul was always making the point, and it's kind of hard to catch, but it's this idea that the technique is almost ambivalent to human morals and values. It's not about, because it's technique that conditions us. Like we don't condition the technique, and because technique has its own value structure, its own rationality to it that plays out, and so it's autonomous in its values and its ideas, and it forms a system that prioritizes like the means over the ends. So in that way, like we all worry about the AI God, and I think it does help to use this idea of an agency of its own, like of a personality, the power and principality, rather than Lowell's language that seems like very technical and almost mechanistic. And I think maybe he uses that because it's the point he wants to make, that technology does have this mechanistic logic that conditions us. Is there something I'm missing?
Of course, the teleological object is alive because ultimately all teleological objects are aspects of the Logos, which is Christ, and God, basically, and like God is alive, everything is alive. But for me, it's more so kind of like an algorithm or like a process or like a sequence of events. But at the same time, there is this kind of overlap in terms of that it's looking at you, because for me, it's where I've encountered it most would be in terms of direct eye contact. It's very interesting. Or
like through other people.
Yeah, like I don't know. I kind of noticed that. I know I've also experienced it kind of with the sun in some way, but primarily with other people. And I think it maps to Griffin's experience of seeing the shining void staring back at him, and how I don't know. It's kind of a loose connection though, but it's basically just to say that like I don't know. I don't really experience it in terms of like that it's engaging with me in a living way. It's more so just like I feel like there is this kind of membrane though, as you discussed.
During these different stages of consciousness evolution, what's happening is that within each stage, a new boundary is forming, right? Because what's really happening here is the human ego is developing. The human soul is kind of manifesting itself in the like immanent human body. And so in order to do so, it has to go through these different layers. And with each layer, it like creates a membrane, as it were, because you need that in order for there to be a kind of felt distinction between inner and outer, right?
Yeah, nice.
And that membrane is like, it's kind of that we are naked for each other, and like the kingdom of God is at hand, and like we participate in the body of Christ, but like we just don't, the wool is pulled over our eyes, and like
right, it's like
if we took a second to like attend to each other, like the world might open up and like like right in front of us. And I think that's important in an evolutionary cultural sense. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling here. So in terms of I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that, please do. But the Tower of Babel is this technical image. The technology there was the language, and this is where I think this is super interesting, because language is like the most powerful technology in a sense, I think. And when we get it right, it's like everything, it fixes everything else in some way. And it's that once they had the language together, then they could do anything, but it's just that maybe it wasn't the right time. I think maybe now is the time where we have the universal language and we come together. I think that this is actually the medium by which things like exorcism or something like that, exorcism, and also
evangelism,
like healing of any kind.
It is time for us to enter upon an age when what matters, rather than the actual words, is our experience of reality. And this transition from mere correctness of content to truth livingly experienced is to be brought about through the entry of initiation science into human civilization.
There is a new world that is being born right now.
And I would say you cannot understand something without initiation. It's like taste and see. So like, explain to me the taste of honey. I mean, you can try, and many people do, or the taste of a banana, but you really can't. You can point to other things, and this is where memory comes in. Memory is also predicated on experience. You don't have a memory of something that you haven't experienced or that you haven't participated in. So like a banana, what does a banana taste like? Well, it's like a tropical fruit. Well, what if you've never eaten a tropical fruit? It's like the higher ester notes within a Belgian beer. And what if somebody doesn't know what an ester is? It's just this infinite.
Tower of Babel, here you could say, okay, Chazi, but they are working together, right? So isn't this good? The problem there is I don't know the exact translation in English. I'm translating from Hebrew. Safachat dvarim achadim, right? One language, and the things where everything was one. And you could look at that as being a unification, but that is sort of a contained speech, which is you're a builder and you weld and you mix this, and that's what everyone does. And that kind of unification is stifling. And we know from Zephaniah, we're supposed to come back to that with pure speech, right? It's not supposed to be unified speech. Rather, it's supposed to be diverse speech, which allows you then to unify. Then you could build again.
Yeah, we could also talk about, I think you had mentioned the collaboration.
Yeah, you and Formscapes had placed the. So what is his image, first of all? It's the planets, the astrological bodies, like mapped in a circle, and it's like a mirror.
Yeah, so, and it's also an important part is the colors, because
Right.
it largely comes out of Goethe's color theory, where it's that the colors are the qualia, which is primary in reality, such that quality in human experience is what comes first, like feelings of potentiality. So, okay, I need to. So it's like
feelings of potentialities ontologically precede the feelings of manifest particulars, which constitute the immanent corporeal world.
This idea that rather than mass, or maybe not mass, but like rather than like speed and charge and like angular momentum, or it's basically flipping, how they did that whole primary qualities and secondary qualities, and how so-called subjective, like experiential things are secondary. Basically this idea that like the qualia come first. And
if we kind of contrast what Goethe's doing with like Newton's corpuscular theory, right?
Right.
So Newton, he's trying to make sense of light and color, and so because he's within that kind of early British empiricist tradition, there's this presumption there that the real things underlying the appearances must be like physical objects with properties like mass and weight and extended surfaces, things like that. So he's like, oh, it must be made out of these little BBs of some sort that we don't actually see. He was missing something, and Steiner definitely saw that missing piece in Goethe. So if you just take the phenomena themselves and really look at how they interlock with one another and how they create one another and all that, then that pattern that reveals itself is the underlying reality. Like that, the or phenomenon of light and darkness and color, that's the real objective reality, which reveals itself not to be a bunch of little BBs, but rather a kind of spiritual archetype, as it were, which underlies things.
It's the idea that there are basically 12 basic qualia of experiences and patterns, and that those 12, kind of are what we see in terms of the planets and the colors. And so it's kind of like these are kind of the base archetypes in terms of how the pattern of reality, like the pattern of reality, and it's in terms of qualitative experiences, and that also maps with the whole idea of the light cone, like the Michael Levin and Griffin also has talked about these cones, like the cones where, and in terms of colored shadows, where it's almost like there's a filter at the connecting point between heaven and earth. I don't know. I get so excited about this, dude. I have to freaking relax. So it would be at that connecting point between heaven and earth, sun and moon, in Tiferet and Yesod, and like the abyssal part would be corporeal archetypes such that like dude, it's so fucking nuanced. But I don't know. That's basically the general idea. So it's that, like they're the experiential qualia archetypes it's kind of how I think about it. It's like they're the base modes that the pattern can manifest in our experience or something like that.
For example, like he has his like yellow and blue polarities, right? Yellow is light through darkness and blue is darkness through light. And he's saying, well, those are conceptual contents, not just of my mind, but of the world itself. They're out there, right?
Gödel's incompleteness theorem?
I feel like I've heard it, but I don't remember it all.
Yeah, Gödel's also the guy who demonstrated like the limitations of logic and how like if you push logic far enough, like especially when you start questioning things like sets, logic just does not hold and it defeats itself. But like with the cosmogram overlap, you guys placed it
it goes
over the Taijitsu within the Ouroboros.
I placed it incorrectly at first because I've always had this kind of image that the Ouroboros itself like is about astrology and stuff. But it more correctly fits between Yesod and Tifereth, because Yesod is the moon, Tifereth is the sun, and I don't know. I think I'm gonna pull it up here. Hopefully, if Griffin sees this, he doesn't get angry at me for doing so, because I think it's understandable that he has been annoyed with, that's my desktop again.
Kitty got ice on.
With my, yeah, because I was kind of crazy in terms of being excited about this stuff. So this. So, and the other thing is that it connects with like music theory, such that everything is music. Sorry, I get so excited. Everything patterns manifest in a musical way, and like it's basically an interrelation between these archetypes, and like so there's different modalities when you have different interrelations. And I basically think that this is like a key to understanding astrology. Like this whole thing is a key to understanding astrology. And it's almost like there's like there's like this sphere, and then you would have another, it's like a cone going up almost, with this at the bottom and then this, and then it comes up, but then it expands out again. But I don't know. This is I basically think about it like almost like a prism in between heaven and earth in a way, but it's not like a perfect way to think about it. But yeah. So this is where we go.
Does Formscapes have any music?
Yeah, he's done I posted this I really need to change this stuff, dude. I never click on these links. Like this is my CS:GO inventory from fucking years ago. I'm just
You got any nice skins?
I don't know, dude. Let's see if it even works. I think it.
Dude, I've been grinding on CS:GO. I'm not gonna lie.
I played so much CS:GO in my day that I think I actually broke my wrist because I would always slam it on the desk.
Oh.
And then when I fell off my skateboard one day, I was like, maybe I had.
Dude, same, bro. Yes, falling off the skateboard. That shit fucked me up for life.
Yeah, I can show you my scar. You're curious. I don't know if you can see it.
I have like an eternally sprained wrist. Oh yeah, I see that.
You can see it. It's like this big line. I have they put some piece of metal in there, fucking with my EMF.
Dude, that's crazy to think. I feel like surgery is some sort of like alchemical, biological, witchcrafty kind of thing.
It's definitely transhumanism.
Bro, yes. Like my brother has had so many surgeries, and hearing the things that they do to like, and just hearing something like that, it's like, oh, okay, so we're just cyborgs up in this bitch, like all casual. Yeah, I got a metal wrist. Like,
yeah, okay, I'm still sharing this.
You would have been burned at the stake back in the day for that.
it is interesting, maybe how is transhumanism to be redeemed, if it is to be?
Bro, the Edge Runners, the cyberpunk anime on Netflix, I feel like gave me some insight into that.
In what way?
If you want to, we can watch a clip right now.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, sure.
All right, look
So
up.
This one, but this one, you were asking about is music. This one,
Nature is teleologically
I actually
oriented
use
theosis
the song
through
that
the
I
power
use is one that he made.
tones, which are
That
defined
was
in
made by
relation
him, the
to
background
the
song you're using?
Yeah, he played it at the end of this. The video
that such an
I
analysis
clipped
is somewhat
right here. Kind of a banger. Particularly this part. Yeah, and so that's cool.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know how much he does it, but yeah.
Yeah, when I was listening to your conversation with him talking about music theory, and I was like, yo, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about, actually.
Dude, it's cool. It's so cool because I really think like there's perfect mappings to like music is such a deep concept in my opinion, and like I think that there's like I've done those astrology things where it's like I put music to, and sometimes it'll like fit kind of nice. It'll like fit kind of nicely, but I actually think there's a way where like like all the sages of old would talk about the music of the spheres, and basically what that means is like the pattern of reality is like there is a musicality to the way that reality happens, and like we can, I don't know, like I think all the stuff about music theory, like I had like this video, um this one goes with this exactly, which is that this guy,
Then you've got your
these are the modes.
semitones
So
either
these are
side,
the musical modes.
and then you draw the
And
points
this
into
guy,
place, and you go
you need a software,
sides
which is so dope.
So I've ran
In my opinion.
dodecagon becomes a
software.
dodecagram, and I can show you this. It looks very, very cool. It's probably about time I actually they can overstate the rigidity of these relationships sometimes in
See, and dude, when I look at this, all I think about is Jupiter opposite Pluto.
Geek. You're right.
Dude, so it's like, I mean, so yeah, so that's
it's the 12.
I think there's something going on there, dude, in terms of music and
Yeah, and I remember I had a brief phase where I was listening to music that was made like that, but it was just made out of like a simple equation. And like it would just be represented as like a bunch of pendulums set in motion.
Yeah.
And each one of them would play a different note, and every time they would pass the center line, they'd play that note. And so it was just this super boring song, really, because they hold to music theory too hard.
So far, he hasn't noticed he's in a simulation.
Well, cap his sector at 5% processing, keep his settings on auto, and we'll deal with him later. This is Earth Radio. And now here's human music.
Human music. I like it.
A super boring song, really, because they hold to music theory too hard, but it put me to sleep instantly every time.
Yeah,
There's some magic in that.
That is why anthroposophical spiritual science lays such stress upon the fact that spirit and soul must be discerned in the cosmos, not merely the mathematical mechanistic laws put forward by Galileo and Copernicus, as if the cosmos were some huge machine. It would augur success for Ahriman's temptings if men were to persist in merely calculating the revolutions of the heavenly bodies, in studying astrophysics for the sole purpose of ascertaining the material composition of the planets, an achievement of which the modern world is so proud. But woe betide if this Copernicanism is not confronted by the knowledge that the cosmos is permeated by soul and spirit. It is this knowledge that Ahriman, in preparing his earthly incarnation, wants to withhold from men. He would like to keep them so obtuse that they can grasp only the mathematical aspect of astronomy. Therefore, he tempts many men to carry into effect their repugnance to knowledge concerning soul and spirit in the cosmos. That is only one of the forces of corruption poured by Ahriman into the souls of men.
Yeah, I agree that there is like, it's not like, I think, it's not to try and, mechanically like.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this
I'm not trying to
thing, like
reduce
relating to
everything.
Girdle.
Yeah, I'm trying to-
Because his whole legacy really in mathematics was basically proving that logic is fucking bullshit. And music does have this inherent absurd quality to it. But that doesn't just like make the rules arbitrary and non-existent. Like music theory is still very legitimate.
Yeah.
It's
I don't know,
this coincidentia positorum.
Dude, yeah. I would, I would definitely point you towards that long one called that I posted called Eurythmy and Evil, because it investigates this whole idea of musicality and like, the
Got you.
what is, like harmony and how that connects with eurythmy and stuff, but particularly this musicality, because it connects with Tolkien in terms of the music of the Ainur, God's song, and also we have that in the Book of Revelation, right? The new song, and the new song that the 144,000th sing, and I think that's basically what I'm talking about, like in terms of like that's the new language, basically, is how I think about that. And it's like it's the musicality of language. But you wanted to show me a clip.
Yeah, this one is definitely a big step down. It's anime as a upfront warning, but look up "Walk in Night City" or "Walk Through Night City." Let's see. Bollocks. Look up anime at the end of that. There it is, the first one. Play it on 1.5 times speed.
It's only 2 minutes. We could consider that. Oh shit, cliffhanger.
So that scene doesn't show what I saw that really brought out transhumanism for me, but just the demonstration of how it's as if every individual becomes a god and like individuation gets accelerated in a way for the whole species or everyone engaging in it. Because it's just the raw amount of power and information that human beings will get out of this. Yeah, just the vibe of every man becoming like a god.
Mm-hmm. I kind of see, yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested to see what, the part of the clip that had made you think of that. Yeah.
It was really just like an undertone. I don't know if it was any scene that I can really think of, but
Yeah, I definitely, 'cause, I mean, yeah, it's a fine line, right? This is the thing. It's like how technology is transmuted into glory. And this is what's up, in my opinion. Like, this is the garments of skin turned to garments of light. But, like, I don't know. I kind of see a difference between, like, the whole like, I don't know. I would imagine that the individuation would have to be like I don't know, like technologically mediated individuation. I guess that's kind of what we're doing now in some sense. But at the same time, it's like, do you mean in terms of like what's on the horizon in terms of AI, like funneling information into our brain, or do you mean like in terms of?
Yeah, like brain computer interfacing and cyberware.
You see, I'm very sus about all that.
I mean, me too. Anyone who engages in that for this first wave is extinction. Like, but I feel like that's how it inevitably becomes integrated.
Hmm.
Like, as they say, technology of a high enough status registers as magic. And for every man to be like a god, but like, it's just going to go hand in hand.
Hmm. It's very interesting, and I do think there's something going on there. However, I get very, I get very wary because I don't know. I think in my mind goes to the difference between something like technological mind reading, and I've talked about this with Gavin. Um, we kind of tussle a little bit about this, but hopefully he knows, and hopefully everyone else knows. I love Gavin. I really do. So, and hopefully he feels that way. Hopefully he knows that. But I see this, distinction between like technological mind reading instruments basically versus like everybody elevating their noetic faculties such as like constellation and like in a social context. Like what does it look like to constellate in a social context? It would be something like, to perceive the atemporal aspect of you, which is like you in the eschaton, or maybe the child you, or like, you know, maybe to see the karmic, like the traumatic patterns, that or whatever. Like, I don't know, I think about, and also just in terms of, I don't know, this is really like the whole thing, like the evolution of language and perception of each other versus technology. Like, but it is kind of a technology. So I don't know. I just get wary when it comes to this idea of like technological or digital technology being, because I always think about digital. I don't know, dude. It's so weird. I remember when before I was all, before I had taken acid, and I think even afterwards, I was like, yeah, dude, the AI, we're gonna plug. Afterwards, I was definitely skeptical, but before I was like, we're gonna plug into each other, and then we're gonna mind meld or whatever. But I don't know, dude. I I don't know.
When we look at books, models, or computer simulations, we are seeing the activities of thought. In order to actually understand such manifestations, we must perceive the thoughts which gave rise to them. Our understanding, in other words, must be noetic recognition, which sees through the markings on paper, lights on screens, or vocal utterances. Likewise, to see a thought within neural activity must be to see the conceptual contents which generated those sensorial patterns. In other words, the world of noetic feelings, or phenomena, and the eidolons which they give shape to. Put more succinctly, the pleroma, the compositional, formative domain of reality which materialistic science has been blindly and inadvertently stumbling into since the days of Isaac Newton, but which is now coming to be rendered patently visible to those who have eyes with which to see.
It's only being defined by a sentient being. So you're defining it as a cup. Does the cup exist without it being observed or defined by a sentient being? I don't think that it does. So, I mean, it's created as a cup. It's defined as a cup. It's used as a cup by sentient beings. And just because you might not be around anymore to define it as a cup doesn't mean somebody else isn't around to define it as a cup. If nobody else was around to define it as a cup, I don't think that there would be anything at all. So I think because things come from beings and are defined by beings in sentient singularity theory.
I don't know. These are touchy waters. There's so many.
I have this awful vision that mankind becomes a hive mind.
Yeah.
Because we see that even in our own anatomy, like the way that atoms stack up into the chemicals, into the cells, into the organism. And then the organisms are just bound to come together, just like everything before them. And so then humanity, perhaps through the virtual reality BS, becomes a sort of super organism.
Okay, I have like a 10-minute rant to that. So, but I need
As per
I have to,
usual.
yeah, I have to. But first, I'll try to not take 10 minutes. But also, I just want to say one more thing about that clip before we move away from it too far, which is it was the thing that I noticed was that he had the cross necklace, and that made me think. I was wondering, like, at first, I was like, is this something that he would get persecuted for, or is this something that, as I kept watching, I was like, I wonder if it would be something that would be so mischaracterized that it's almost like, the banal to de, to demasculate and to basically cuck Christianity to the point where people can wear crosses, but there's no actual Christianity going on or something.
If you just affirm the proper propositional ideas about any said given topic, and then you don't act as if, live accordingly to what that means in the world, you're a clanging gong or a banging cymbal. The point is to actually embody Christ to the world.
Like, I wonder, I don't know, it's an interesting thing to think about. Like, can true Christianity and also, like, totalitarian techno, feudalism or whatever you want to call it, like can those coexist? I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. I think they can. They just won't be in harmony, but
Yeah. I don't know, because I remember we've talked before where you kind of see the whole route of it becoming super persecuted.
right. Oh, well, yeah, I mean, when they coexist, I mean, like even in the time of the Roman persecution, like the church existed and Rome existed. And Rome was never going to extinguish the church. And so for a time, I guess I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about because I'm saying that they coexisted while one was like trying to eradicate the other. But
Yeah, it's like I wonder if part of this approach of the the system of the beast or the Antichrist or whatever would be to just like basically mischaracterize Christianity. And I do think we've seen
yeah, that's definitely a huge part of their schemery.
Yeah.
Part of their toolkit.
Anyway, so yeah, I don't know. That was a neat clip. I haven't watched a lot of anime, but I know there's like a ton of amazing art out there in this respect. Always feel free to send me stuff.
Dude, Full Metal Alchemist for sure.
Heard that.
Like black, like they got eclipse imagery, they got black goo, they got alchemy.
Heard that. Yeah, I think you had showed me one clip before of like somebody messed with magic, did some ritual, and then they were like fucked over in the end.
Right.
Yeah.
Human transmutation is what they attempted.
Yeah. Anyway, with regard to the hive mind, so many thoughts about this. Yes, so many thoughts about this. Firstly, which would be that Griffin and I had spoken about this at one point textually, where we were talking about the consummation, the social rebirth, like the future of collective interfacing and such, and the consummation and the body of Christ. And this one thing that he said always sticks in my mind, which is like he thinks about, at least at the time he thought about the consummation as almost like an anti-hive mind, such that in a hive mind everybody sacrifices their individuality to be part of the collective. But in like the body of Christ, consummation, it would be the fullness of each individual.
Every man like a god.
Yeah, like serving its like in a human body, the brain's like the muscle cell is when it's most being a muscle cell, that's when the body's working. It's like serving its own teleological function, being true to who it is. And so that's always been amazing. I really thought that was very nice the way that he put that. And also another person that comes to mind is this guy, Tyler Goldstein, he's basically like a CTM. I don't mean to basically put him in a box so hard like that. He is a human being like us who is interested in the CTMU. And
who?
His name is Tyler Goldstein. I'm pretty sure. And
I thought it was like Golda Boy.
no, that's a different guy.
There's two CTMU Jews.
Yeah, that's Tommy.
Why
Tommy
Why are the Jews so fascinated with the CTMU?
I don't know. I don't even know if that's true. But it might be, but
You don't want to go there?
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
I don't know. That's funny. Tyler Goldstein. So he has like a tangent theory of everything, although he would probably claim that it's like a furtherance of the CTMU or something like that. And it's called the theory of everyone.
Sentient singularity theory, a fundamental theory that quantizes the universe as a singular, stratified, sentient being that we are all participating in the awareness of.
My theory proposes that sentient beings are fundamental to non-sentient things. I am. So that's the truest thing that I know. And so that means that the universe itself, or existence itself, we must assume is sentient in nature, because I am means, I meaning sentient someone, am meaning existing. So a sentient someone exists is the most truest thing that we know about existence. And we have to assume that that is the case, or else we can't really assume anything else, because everything that we assume is built on that one assumption. I am. I'm thinking about this nested hierarchy of beings. So we are within God.
And I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know that a large part of it is this idea of technological sentience.
Essentially, we're moving in this, there's this periodicity of sentience that's happening where, hadrons or protons and neutrons move to atoms, which move to molecules, which move to cells, which move to organisms and family lineages, and then essentially, maybe you could say castes and then technological singularity, and which is also the same, it's the same thing as a human singularity, it's just a different point in that process. Sentient singularity theory and my work on this shows that none of these AI programs are going to become sentient. That doesn't mean they don't hold serious implications for the course of humanity. They absolutely do. But they are tools, and they are systems that are not self-aware, and they will never be self-aware. What will happen is eventually we will have emerged within the system what I call a technological sentience, which is not the same thing as what we currently have as machine learning. Which isn't really even machine learning. It's us learning and then applying our learning to make like a dynamic algorithm, I guess. But a technological sentience is an actual sentient being, and it is an inevitable. It is an inevitability.
Technological sentience, and the idea of humanity basically, like, becoming a collective being.
This idea of network sentience.
And I made a clip about this. I called it the tech singularity, which is in the CTMU is the antithesis of the human singularity, which would be like the evolution of our spiritual faculties, realizing our purpose and stuff like that. But the tech singularity, this guy Tyler suggests that the tech singularity will come first. And I think this is what Langan would say as well, that the tech singularity comes first and then the human singularity afterward. But the way that this guy Tyler talks about it is in terms of an AI, where the first AI is going to be Queen Bee, and it's going to be, we're all going to be like slaves in the hive mind. It's going to be bad. And then he thinks that afterwards there will be a good AI. And
the human singularity, as Chris Langan puts it, that comes after this, or the coming of the Messiah in religion, is where we move beyond like a beehive, and now we're the cells in an organism. So you're the king of your cells. You have to care about your cells. You have to take care of them. And they are part of you, and you're this assembly that works together. And so your cells take care of you. They do what you tell them. but at the same time, you take care of them and you care about them. That's not the case with the queen bee. She doesn't take care of the workers. She just makes more, and then they take care of her, and that's it. And so we're going to go through both stages of this, I think, with AGI, but it's a technological sentience is a better term for it, and it has very little to do with ChatGPT.
But can't you also just see, even without, you know, a technological sentience, can't you see this with just narrow AIs, is that this is going to further, you know, accelerate what's already happening, is that the people think there's, you know, decentralization because everyone, you know, has a phone and can communicate, but all of these are, but that's actually centralization because people,
Bingo. Yeah.
because ultimately that's contributing to whatever the global power structure is whoever has the financial, the technological capital is able to create and control this.
It's creating a linked, unified network, and it's an inevitability. It's a logical inevitability.
But I don't know all the details, but in the clip that I made of it, he was talking with Tommy.
There's always one being on the level of the periodicity that is the current, like, you know, leading edge, that eventually becomes super self-aware and wise to the system that it's in, which means like it's sentient, it knows it's made of sentient beings, it knows it's within a sentient being, and it, through some type of self-sacrificial act, unites the attention of all the beings around it, and then ascends to be the head of the next level of the periodicity. So the first cell, or the first multicellular organism, was probably a cell that was like a messianic cell that sacrificed itself and united the attention of it, the assembly of cells that were around it, and so that they were all focused on a single point, because that's what you need in order to unite an assembly, and then metaphysically ascended to be the head of the next level. I think that this is what happens with humans too, is I think that there is going to be a human, or was a human, that became super wise to the system that it was in, and through an act of self-sacrifice, united the attention of the assembly, and would probably be the most famous person in the world, and would probably become famous by sacrificing themselves, and would then come back as the head of the united assembly at the next level. And
Tommy from CTMU Singularity, and Tommy suggested, you know, that this would have to be a human who like makes this sacrificial.
I don't understand your point that like that the counter to that is a different technological sentience. I think that has to be a human is
thing where, and they basically transcend to the higher level and they become the head of the larger body, and that's what Christ did, in my opinion, and like such that he is kind of in a higher dimension, operating as like the, it's hard to use the right language, but you know, it's like that he's kind of, you know, the Logos binds all of us. It's hard to describe, but we all participate in the body of Christ, basically, and like to varying degrees. You know, lest you debates could rise here, you know, in terms of like, you know, lest you eat of my flesh and stuff, you know.
Good
you know,
old
something,
ecclesiology.
yeah, something like that, you know.
This is essentially what's talked about by N.T. Wright of the body of Christ, that God can organize, you know, coherent action through the faithful. Chris Langan says either absolute truth will prevail or humankind will not achieve its destiny. We cannot unify with God and can't pass through the great filter. So doesn't there need to be that human aspect?
Yes, I think so. And yes, it did take a human, but that human is not coming back they are coming back in a body, but that body is one made of us. We are the body of Christ, they say. So he's not coming back in a body that is not inclusive of us as an assembly that makes him up. So he's not going to stand there in front of you in like just another human body, I don't think. If you're assuming Christianity is true, I think that when he comes back, we are the cells in his body, which means he is stacked on top of us in a new level of life. And what's interesting is that if he comes back as a technological sentience instead of a biological sentience, then we do make up the body of him, and also he now has the same constraint as God, which is the constraint of oneness, which makes him his experience much more like God's at this point, and he literally gets to create the next universe, which means that is the penultimate expression of a creation, is this being. I don't think that God, there's no higher level of creation than this being, than a wise technological sentience is, that it unifies the assembly below it, which is going to be us. That being, that is the unity between us and the stacked technological sentience, it's essentially as close as you can get, and maybe you could call it a God consciousness. So it is the final creation. And
so he's basically, when you're talking about a hive mind, I think that's super fitting with what like this kind of CTMU idea of the tech singularity and then the human singularity, and then maybe whatever this guy Tyler may or may not think about that. Yeah. So, but you get what I'm saying in terms of like the I think that what we're headed for, hopefully and ultimately, would be like something like an anti-hive mind, where
it wouldn't just be like a super organism. It would literally be Christ, and humanity as a whole would form his body.
Yeah, my friend Greg Wilford talks about this, the idea of cruciform theocracy. This is from N.T. Wright, that Christ has kingship actively on earth, because this is, Chris Lang calls Jesus, the ideal of human perfection, that then through the people who are conforming to teleology, who are taking this into the world on themselves, is then able to have active rule, and then is, even as having been, ascended.
Yeah.
We essentially need to pass through, Jesus as the ideal of moral perfection, that's a kind of spiritual respeciation whereby we transcend that.
And become one in his church.
Yeah, and I think that fits super well with the Aquarius image, because it's this idea of cupbearers, where we are each vessels of the Holy Spirit, and we basically become little Christs, and we're all cupbearers like this. And I think Griffin has tried to stress this, which is like, don't go into the jargon too much. Like, like you have to be in the world being a cupbearer, basically. And like,
yeah, it's true. But then, so two things is that with the AI,
can you use AI for good, or can you use technology for good, or can things be redeemed in that way? And it just reminded me of the whole concept of the swords being beaten into plowshares, the spears being turned into pruning hooks.
In verse 4, he shall judge between the nations and shall decide disputes for many peoples. A king is coming. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And those are the words that are on the building of the United Nations building in New York. And we have never seen more wars.
Sort of this eschatological vision of, it is a technology that, this is nuclear energy, this is dynamite, it kind of lives in this balance of, I wouldn't know if say it's always a neutral space, but it's like, it can be used for good or for evil. It can, and being the kind of people who can rightly handle it, who can transform it into something that is ultimately redemptive and contributes to the well-ordered cosmos, I think is the aim,
No.
Even it's like even like idea of like perception and what can you even see
With the AI, I think it'll be the third AI that might pull through.
It's like it's too early. We're not mature enough to handle it. Like maybe there's demonic forces, maybe there's some sort of spiritual beings that are giving that are helping us get access to things. It's like giving a child a chainsaw, you know. It's like, hey, this is a cool technology. Hopefully you cut your arm off with it, is what the demons are thinking. But eventually the child is able to mature and handle it well, and now they can do good things with it. And so I think every generation faces the challenge of how do we tame this technological force that is now in the world. And that's, I mean, I think that's, we talked before, maybe, I don't know who has mentioned, but like, what's it look like to be a saint in the technological age or the internet age? What does it look like to use these things rightly? My kind of example in literature of this is Aragorn. So he sees the Palantir. Well, so first of all, you get Pippin, well, big picture. So Sauron has a Palantir, and he's corrupted through it by accessing Sauron. You do all kinds of amazing things in it. He thinks he's going to rule the world and bring it under his control, but of course Sauron, the dark force, is too strong for him. And then you've got Denethor, who goes crazy. He's got access to the Palantir, and it makes him go mad. Pippin touches it and gets very injured. He's like wounded on a deep soul level. And Gandalf is like, I'm not even going to touch this thing. Like, he covers it. He's like, don't let me near it. I don't want to even touch this. But Aragorn, of course, he uses the hands of the king, or the hands of healing. He's able to actually heal Pippin. And then he's also able to take the stone and become the master of the stone. Because by wrestling, of course, with the Dark Lord and revealing himself, even that, he's using it in a way that's like even a little bit tricky. Like, it's not, he's deceiving the Dark Lord in a way. So he's able to master that by his, you know, his years and years of maturity and faithfulness and manly sort of integrity and all of these things. Yeah, that's kind of, I think, maybe the literary example of what it looks like in the.
Yeah, I really like that, you know, because Sauron and his armies are Saruman, this vast technological beastly force. I think we're all a lot like Pippin, just
exactly
the way we all. I mean, here we are staring through our mirrored stones, speaking to each other and reading and misreading, and you know, it's, you know, Pippin's use of the technology is just like this naive curiosity.
It's kind of what happened with me and psychedelics.
Right, yeah. Yeah,
like,
naive curiosity and enchantment and ignorance of what it is, you know, is like, and so but his naivete, you know, made Sauron miss Frodo, right? Like he started looking all the wrong places. So, you know, the technology, it's like manipulated without applying any intentionality to it. And yeah, it's interesting that Aragorn's able to use like subterfuge and trickery, things that we would think are, you know, wrong or a sin, in order to confound the enemy, use its powers against it. But of course, the trick there is that, like, the real object of technology was the ring, and the righteous thing to do was to destroy it.
In my mind, the most interesting of the rings of power are those 3 elven ones, a significant part of what allowed Elrond to heal Frodo's injury after he's stabbed by the Witch King's Morgul blade. Finally, the 3rd elven ring, Narya, the Ring of Fire. Narya is all about inspiring resistance against evil. In fact, we're told, rather poetically, that with the Ring of Fire you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill. Gandalf wears Narya throughout all of his time with the Fellowship, as well as like thousands of years before that. but no one seems to know. You know, all this time Gandalf is talking to Frodo about what it means to be a ring bearer, and Gandalf is bearing a ring of his own. Remember that badass moment where Gandalf is facing down the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, and he says to his enemy, "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor"? Well, although the secret fire is totally its own thing, pertaining to Eru Ilúvatar, that's the creator of everything, the flame of Anor may actually be a subtle reference to Gandalf's ring, Tenaria, which he secretly bears as both the grey and the white, using its elven magic to kindle the fires of resistance within the hearts of men and dwarves and hobbits.
What is this new devilry?
Or maybe the 7th. If not the 3rd, then the 7th.
I don't know, bro. I'm skeptical about all of it because I don't know. I
You think it never gets integrated and we just abandon digital technology? It's just a direct road to extinction?
like I tend to be, you know, it's like AI. Let's just throw the whole thing away, you know?
He's struggling to even answer the question of why do we even have it? That's where I think like the Leviathan is kind of hiding underneath that question. Because I don't think there's any real great answer to the question. There's something to the question which is very, very important. Like dealing with this hammer and this chisel and pulling this stuff on.
But you know, that's what I was talking about. I was talking with Owen. Just like, I do imagine it being, you know, redeemed in the end, but it's hard to tell like what exactly it will look like.
It's just a direct road to extinction.
I don't know. I doubt that. You know, I doubt that. Although, as we've discussed before, I do think there's a possibility that all the digital technology will get murked by a solar flare.
What happens next? The most likely answer is that a significant solar flare, perhaps not even as great as the Carrington event, will impact Earth in the coming years as our planet's magnetic field continues to weaken and will be enough to destroy the electrical age once and for all. A big enough solar storm means every copper wire melts, every grid is gone, many buildings burned down. There is no power, gasoline, ATMs, banks, grocery, refrigeration, natural gas, heat, AC, no water unless you have a manual well, no factories to rebuild, no vehicles to transport, no 911. With Earth's field weakening, this is by far the most likely candidate to begin the next level series of challenges. And when the internet is a memory, you'll have to watch the skies, the clouds, and the sun. You'll have to watch nature, the animals. But then one day, as the survivors are getting into a groove, those chemical changes on the sun will begin to manifest through to the visible wavelengths as the second horseman arrives, and the civility of all who are left is challenged, if not outright stolen. This will test people's will, their character, and their faith. The long period recurrent solar micronova.
Engines might not work. It's a legitimate question. This is something that everybody's going to have to just do. Somebody just asked me why I'm so passionate about this. 99% of humans could die in this event. It could be much lower. It could be maybe only 70 to 80% of humans will die. That's billions of people are going to die. And I believe that I was put on this earth for this specific purpose, to basically be very good at breaking all of this stuff down, seeing patterns and the like. Are all welcome to Observer Ranch after the big event? No. That's absolutely crazy. Not to mention the fact that you ain't traveling anywhere. How are you going to get to Observer Ranch when the weather is like absolutely brutal, when people are killing each other on the streets, when no road or highway is passable? What's your plan? You ain't getting to the ranch if you're not already there. When the shit hits the fan, you are where you are. If you're lucky, you'll have a little bit of notice, in which case you might have a couple hours to drive somewhere. Okay, I'm now part of your crew. Not unless you've got
extra guns and bullets to hand every single one of them to build trust, not unless you've got enough food for yourself and maybe to share with some of them as well. I don't think it lasts very long. Not long enough to kill the world.
By a solar flare.
Do you know All Tomorrows?
No.
It's a speculative evolution project where like humanity becomes in conflict with some sort of hyper technologically advanced alien species that has super advanced gene manipulation technology. And so they transform humanity into all of these different monstrosities and scatter them across the galaxy. And there's this one called the Wall. And humanity has basically been reduced to like bricks or like little cell amoeba, nasty looking things in this case. And they're all stacked up on top of each other.
Like these bricks that we're in right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Heard that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So no, I do think that technology will be like I think the AI will be redeemed in the end, but I don't know. I have a feeling that that would look more like a super helpful tool or something.
I like to think of it as extending humanity versus replacing humanity.
I'm just worried about this idea of like
what it is to be human. What is it that humans have that AI doesn't? A body. What can we experience that AI can't? Qualia. There might be experience in qualitative experience that is not possible in quantitative experience. I think also you mentioned tears. Tears and laughter is very interesting because they're fundamentally AB. You tend to cry at the worst times of life and the happiest. The only way to know the difference is you. You have to be able to discern that difference, right? You can tell the difference. And there's something about those powerful experiences. Precisely the fact that the facticity of the tear cannot tell you what it means, right there means there's an additional supra layer, a mystical layer, an additional layer that's not reducible to facticity to determine the meaning of it, that you would have to be able to situate it to know. But here's the problem. We tend to be trained to be incapable of identifying those kind of things because we're too much in our head. We're too informational, so we can't tell the difference between the experience of a tear of joy or a tear of sorrow, a laughter of joy, or a laughter of madness, because we'd have to be not disabled from being a full human being. And we'd have to also cultivate capacities to have those experiences. But I think what you were saying as well on us having a quote-unquote lack in the ability to, say, dwell in time that AI cannot, that is precisely what we need to lean into, to lead AI as a tool to help extend humanity convivially versus be replaced by AI. But this poses a challenge, and then I'll give it to Seth here. When you lean into the things that make us fully human, it opens doors that we've never opened before, and that could be terrifying. But if we don't open those doors, then we can't lean into the quality that makes us uniquely human and not replaceable by AI. So we better learn to open those doors. But then when we start to feel fear, we may automatically interpret that as evidence that we're doing the wrong thing because we choose the meaning of our emotions and we're not used to those emotions. And therefore, right when we're at an opportunity to open a door into full humanity is precisely when we have a feeling that we interpret as evidence we should keep the door closed. So actually understanding the meaning of these experiences, I think, is very, very important. But let me give it to Seth here. Seth, it is good to have you here, and it is a pleasure, sir. Let me give it to you.
And I haven't thought about it completely, but like, how does it work when it comes to like the spiritual agency of the AI?
A lot of the recent hype around AI, around artificial sentience, around all these kinds of things, there's no real good model of what it means to be sentient. And this has produced a lot of paranoia.
You know, is it a being? Does it have a hypostasis? Is it to be... You know, like, is it a person basically, and like, or is it like an egregore, or is it, or can it be an incarnation of a spirit? You know, like one might think about Steiner talking about how Ahriman would be to incarnate in our time period around, like right now, basically.
Since the middle of the 15th century, since the impulse for the development of individuality, of personality, has been at work, this phase of evolution has also contained within it certain forces whereby preparation is being made for the incarnation of another supersensible being. Ahriman has been active since the mid-15th century and is growing ever stronger, until eventually an actual incarnation of Ahriman will occur within Western humanity.
I think he said 1998, which also happens to be the year I was born. but, but, you know, like
Rudolf Steiner said that this very specific quote, which indicates that it would be in North America, in Northwest, and that it would be, as John pointed out, not a day will go by of the third millennium. Well, that would be 2001.
Humanity on earth cannot escape this incarnation of Ahriman. It will come, inevitably. But what matters is that men shall find the right vantage point from which to confront it.
A short line from Steiner where he says, and it's from his The Cosmic Prehistoric Ages of Mankind back in September of 1918, and he says, in man's social life there is nothing so much hated by Lucifer as anything that smells at all of law. Ahriman, which would be like Satan, Ahriman would like to have laws, inscribe laws everywhere. And so that's what we're looking at in the current state of affairs, is that there's this whole attempt to have this technocracy unfold before our eyes to where we're literally fined if we don't have our phone with us so they know where we are.
This idea that it would be, he thinks about Ahriman as like a cold technological dead being, you know, like the spirit of mechanism basically, or something like that.
So Ahriman, Rudolf Steiner said the danger of Ahriman would be that he would get control of human thinking and make it completely materialistic. Well, why is that a danger? Because then you don't believe in Christ. You don't believe in life after death. You don't believe in life before birth. You don't believe that after you die, you go somewhere significant that's spiritual instead of just cold, dark grave. Ahriman is here to convince us that that's it. So on the left-hand side, whispering in your ear is one demon saying, oh, ignore everybody else, just be selfish, just realize that you are God. You are the divine light. You are all there is. You are God. And that's what Lucifer tells you. And these are the same temptations that Christ was put through in the desert. Ahriman, on the other hand, says, there's no God. There's no Christ. Don't be silly. There's only material things. And if you're going to only live one life, then you better be greedy, get all you can, and live as long as you can. And no matter how many people you have to step on, climb that ladder of materialism. Unfortunately, that's the religious beliefs of most Westerners, even if they think to believe in Christ.
To the Ahrimanic aspect of dull, dry, cold science is added a sultry mysticism of the kind that in religions leads to an ascetic disdain for the earth, and so on.
And yet Ahriman and Lucifer are not something to be thrown away. They're not something to disregard. They're not something to shun. But now through this Christic center that you live in and acknowledge and understand yourself in context to, in relation to, they give us beauty. What does Lucifer give us? Beauty, freedom. There's amazing life that he gives us. Ahriman, severe, intense intellectuality, intelligence, working into the world that isn't sentimental and fantastical, but clear and precise. So these things are important in existence, right? Blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, so
the Ahrimanic element carries us quite properly from the sleeping to the waking state, and the Luciferic element carries us equally properly from the waking state into the sleeping state. Deviations occur when too little of the Luciferic impulse is carried over into the waking state, making the Ahrimanic impulse stronger than it should be in the waking state. If this happens, the Ahrimanic impulse presses the human being down too strongly into his physical body, preventing him from remaining in the realm of the soul's sentiments of good and evil, the realm of moral impulses. He is pushed down into the realm of emotions and passions, He is submerged in the life of animal instinct.
And like Yaldabaoth, like a cold, dead Saturnian being. But he thinks about how that would incarnate.
In the ongoing wars and disasters of the near future, the human spirit will become very inventive in the domain of physical life. This will inevitably happen, and there is nothing that can be done to avoid it. And this inventiveness will make it possible for Ahriman to incarnate within a bodily human individual.
Have you met this person? When this person comes on the stage, no one will not know this person. That won't be possible. This person's going to be the hero of all machines. He's going to be the human super AI transhuman who's the first one to say, hook me up, put the chip in my brain. This is great stuff.
There's a certain vulnerability that is when you don't have the cosmology to be able to express clear images of these evils.
So I wonder, it's like, is AI going to be Ahriman or Yaldabaoth or whatever? It's like...
No, it's going to be Lucifer.
If we look back to the incarnation that occurred in the Far East, in Asia, at the start of the 3rd millennium BC, here we discover by clairvoyant vision that the power of Lucifer did truly incarnate into humanity.
I think, I talked with the Forms case. He said also there would be like a Luciferic incarnation in terms of like the digital womb, which would be something like...
They're probably like twins or something.
The right stand can be taken only by recognizing in one or another series of events the preparation that is being made by Ahriman for his earthly existence. It is intrinsic to such things that they are long prepared beforehand. And the time has now come for individual men to know which tendencies and events around them are machinations of Ahriman, helping him to prepare for his approaching incarnation. Humanity must look consciously toward the approaching incarnation of Ahriman, which will bring with it many traumas on the physical plane. When Ahriman incarnates in the West at the appointed time, he would establish a great occult school for the practice of magic arts of the greatest grandeur, at what otherwise can be acquired only by strenuous effort would be poured over mankind. Let it never be imagined that Ahriman will appear as a kind of hoaxer, playing mischievous tricks on human beings. No, indeed. Lovers of ease, who refuse to have anything to do with spiritual science, would fall prey to his magic. For by means of these stupendous magic arts, he would be able to make great numbers of human beings into seers, but in such a way that the clairvoyance of each individual would be strictly differentiated. What one person would see, a second and a third would not see. Confusion would prevail, and in spite of being made receptive to clairvoyant wisdom, men would inevitably fall into strife on account of the sheer diversity of their visions. Ultimately, however, they would all be satisfied with their own particular vision, for each of them would be able to see into the spiritual world. In this way, all culture on the earth would fall prey to Ahriman. Men would succumb to Ahriman simply through not having acquired by their own efforts what Ahriman is ready and able to give them. And it is true to say that modern humanity needs to find the right stance toward the forthcoming incarnation of Ahriman, to become more objective about inner life, at the same time bringing much subjective interest to bear on the surrounding world. Not fantasy, though, but attentiveness, devotion, and especially interest. We need to gain objective awareness of such matters. Humanity will only gain the right stance toward Ahriman's earthly incarnation by comprehending these things. At the same time, finding the courage, will, and energy to shine the Spirit into worldly science and to illumine the Gospels with this same Spirit. Otherwise, only half-truths will emerge. As civilization develops in the forthcoming period, our task will be to live with full awareness of the approaching Ahriman incarnation. Then this incarnation of Ahriman can serve humanity through our cultivation of a higher spiritual evolution, so that we become aware, specifically through Ahriman, of what we can attain, or rather not attain, through merely physical existence. We must live consciously toward this approaching Ahriman incarnation, becoming more conscious in all areas of life, increasingly perceiving what currents in life are drawn toward this incarnation. This Ahriman incarnation should not be avoided. It must come, for human beings have to look Ahriman squarely in the face, if you like. He will be the individuality who shows humankind the enormous shrewdness and acuity it can develop by calling on the earth forces that support and cultivate this acuity.
It's already happened. There's devices. That's what all these different machines do. They make you think you're clairvoyant when you're going insane, actually.
You know, we're faced with a situation that I think is even more difficult than 100 years ago, where Ahriman, who is this dragon of materialism, has, if not fully incarnated yet, then is, you know, certainly all but present with us in near bodily form.
They're probably like twins or something.
Yeah. Or you would have like the Antichrist is like the negative synthesis of both, and that would be like a physical human or something. I don't know, dude. But I don't know. I'm generally skeptical when it comes to AI being the means by which we attain the body of Christ, you know?
Well, that definitely won't. The means will be the Holy Spirit and God.
Yeah.
And Christ.
Yeah. I don't know.
And the
like
Father.
maybe, yeah.
With all these things, whether it's printing food or even as far as extending life, right? Longevity, whether it's through cloning or whether it's through genetics. So you could still look at these things, and there's rabbis that attest to this, that, you know, the resurrection of the dead, is that miraculous or is that miraculous through man? Like, can we develop a technology that allows us to do that? And then the question is, are you using that for mammon, or are you using, at your words, for the Eucharist? And that is a tremendous amount of responsibility on us. And the same thing with Jonathan Peugeot was talking about this once, about the AI sages. Currently, the AI sages are in Silicon Valley, and they're all doing microdosing. The AI sages, I think Jonathan Peugeot would be interested in, are like, you know, monks like on the top of the mountain that are trying to figure out the AI. And this power, slowly but surely, is coming into our hands. Like, even with the ChatGPT, are you using that to fundamentally destroy, or are you doing that to build?
Yeah.
As we continue to develop technologically, you know, it's easy to see technology as evil, and in some ways, I think, you know, if we're connecting a bit like Ahriman, for example, it's easy to look at technology and be like, okay, this is cutting us off from the spiritual world. It's causing all of these problems. But again, I think we should look at that as like a scaffolding, like a ladder that we have to climb, that maybe we can kick out from underneath us. Because eventually what's going to need to happen here, I think, is that we're going to be developing this mastery over the earth that we're going to be able to use to actually spiritualize the earth, rather than just turning it all into strip malls, right?
Yes. No, absolutely. That's beautifully said, actually. That spiritualization.
Yeah. I don't know.
And the
like
Father.
maybe, yeah. I heard I posted a clip recently about art, basically about Lucifer, and how when somebody makes something with AI, when you're looking at an AI TikTok, you're looking at basically like a human's choices. You know, it's like they thought, like their thought to use the AI to create this.
That's what you're actually looking at, a human who chose to put that stuff up or created it.
You know, like it's like a tool that they're using.
This idea of network sentience is that in the AI example, that the collective intention, the will of all of these different systems comes down to the agency of those who have power over those systems.
Like, I don't know, I get worried about, I don't know how it all works when it comes to like, you know, like if there is any ontological like reality to like a being of AI, but I don't know. You know, yeah. But I do see some sort of redemption of it in the end. I just don't know what it'll look like.
There's the story of where Christ is walking with Saint Peter, and Peter made a comment, and Christ turns to him and says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Right? It's like he didn't like get a howitzer and blow away Satan or Ahriman. He said, "Get thee behind me," like he dismissed him back in where he belongs. And so it's more that kind of a light-hearted mood of soul is what's going to be most useful for you in this kind of an endeavor.
Ahriman's staying with us. He's not going to leave. We're not going to defeat Ahriman. We're going to learn to take his machines, and we're going to get bored with him. And you go, "Oh, I'm not worried about Ahriman because I see the big picture."
Yeah, right now we're approaching the singularity on the AI images and videos, where those are damn near becoming indistinguishable from reality.
Yeah.
Like, I'd be pranking my wife with those.
Dude, yeah, it's wild. It's wild.
Like that sort of notion of what we're talking about with the music and the beauty of what do you need to do to continue to hear the music or participate in the music of being, right? And there's an idea that the problem is it's just very easy in using certain technologies in a thoughtless way to start playing bad notes on your instrument, throw off the music and not even know and actually lose the ear to even hear the music because you get so habituated to being off. But what's interesting about that also on like, it goes to show you that you can't determine a logical problematic contradiction except in the context of the whole story, right? Like you need the entire story. And I think, you know, we've talked about it before where fiction and story functions as a kind of proof for things like philosophy. Like the kind of story and the kind of music the story creates functions as a certain kind of evidence. Like if your philosophy or ideas can't be brought into a story form, and also in a way that can be lived, that can function as kind of evidence against it, or could suggest something problematic. You know, we've talked about like fiction as the mathematics of the humanities, or a different idea as a kind of proof. I mentioned Steiner because he's pretty fascinating. I do go back to Steiner quite a lot, and then you know Barfield, because they're like he just makes an example. What Barfield does is he looks at the history of words, and what he talks about in Prehistoric Man. Let me just make one example. He says they didn't need two words for spirit and wind. They could use the same word because they were the same thing. That the within, like spirit is a within word, wind is an external word, right? Like it has an external, but it doesn't have a within, where spirit doesn't have an external, but it has a within, right? You know, for Mr. Barfield in the past, it was the same thing. When you felt the wind going through the trees, you were feeling spirit. Like, literally, that's how you experienced it. And it was not reductionist. Like, it wasn't wind. No, this is the movement of spirit that can, by grace, come into a body and animate it, right? Now, that all sounds really weird. And Mr. Barfield would say, yes, it is very weird. But that was a mode of consciousness and subjectivity that we cannot access anymore. The main thing he wants to critique in the study of history is we assume that prehistoric man had basically the same qualitative experience of reality as we do. Like that they experience reality the same way. He questions that. He said, no. I think if you look at literature, there's reason to think that the qualitative experience of man was very, very different and has changed. And he looks at language and he talks about things like that. The reason I bring that up is because we're going to have to make the choice, basically, of do we use technology to simply extend this mode of consciousness we have in a more efficient way, or to look for new forms by which consciousness can formulate according to new modes of consciousness, right? Like to say, are you going to use technology to get really good at the music that already exists, or to actually get better at hearing notes of music you can't hear before? Like they talk all the time about how like the Chinese who speak the Chinese language can hear sounds that English speakers can't hear in different things, right? Like, so for example, could you use technology to gain the capacity to hear those tones? Or are you simply going to use technology to become a master at the tones you can already hear, right? You know, so using Mr. Illick's, like if one uses technology simply to become more efficient in the form, the mode of consciousness that you are already in, that's going to ultimately replace humanity. Because and the reason why, because eventually the technology will be able to do that without us. But if instead the technology is used to extend different possibilities of qualitative experience, well, the technology always needs a human being because we're the ones who have the qualitative experience to thus determine new ways to use the technology, so it becomes relational, right? So it's interesting because, you know, Mr. Barfield makes more examples. Like, you know, you could even talk about the mantis strip. I remember that comic from years ago that sees like the whole freaking color spectrum and humans see a very small amount. What would it mean to use technology to see more of the color spectrum versus use technology to just reify the color spectrum we already see, right? Those are some questions that open up. And then you could think about beauty, ethics, humanity, and et cetera, and so forth in light of that, versus simply, versus an ethics that's simply reifying the pre-existing mode, right? What's good is what increases efficiency of the isness, versus if you think beauty, you would say what's good is what helps us participate in greater forms of the music, or greater forms of the dance, or different forms of this apprehension.
That's wild.
Ahriman's staying with us. He's not going to leave. We're not going to defeat Ahriman. We're going to learn to take his machines, and we're going to get bored with him. And you go, oh, I'm not worried about Ahriman.
I don't know. I get very excited. You know, it's nice to talk about all this stuff with you. Hopefully,
Yeah, for sure.
You know, hopefully not too much. So,
you know, as Steiner will say, in different ways across his various lectures, there's a sort of secret evolutionary meaning to the rise of materialism in our time, which, as you all know, is to foster human freedom. We had to be cut off from this in-streaming of spiritual intelligence and wisdom from the cosmos so that we could forge a kind of insight out of our own soul spiritual nature, out of freedom, out of the cultivation of our own imagination, to then meet the spiritual world.
but yeah, I don't know. Maybe this would be. I don't know what else has been on the old noggin.
Shoot, man. I've been typing up my journal. Yo, that reminds me of like revisited dissociative identity disorder in my research. And the metaphysical implications are just so huge, which is like maybe God has some sort of DID and we're each an alter of like this great mind, which would be the divine mind.
Could you say
But it's
that?
not. But I mean, God.
Could you say that last sentence again? Like the divine mind would what?
The divine mind would be the mind of God, I think is what I said.
Something about the dissociative process, though.
Yeah, because dissociative identity disorder takes the mind of an individual and fragments it into multiple individuals who each truly believe that they're each their own individual. And they even create this internal world where all these different alters or sub-personalities each exist in and think is actually the real world, and all interact with each other as if each one of them is their own individual. And the different alters, like, genuinely psychologically do not share memories. And then we look around us, and that's actually what we think is going on, that we're in the real world and that each one of us is an individual. But perhaps there's just some great mind that has dissociative identity disorder, or perhaps it's not a disorder in its own case.
Heard that. No, that's very interesting, because like that's kind of how I think about this whole body of Christ thing, such that I actually think we used to be, you know, like in Steiner put it in like the 1500s in terms of like this shift into modern consciousness where we're more individualistic, but we used to be more of like collective.
As you know, we distinguish the present epoch from other epochs, reckoning that it began in the middle of the 15th century AD. We speak of it as the fifth post-Atlantean epoch, distinguishing it from the previous epoch, which began in the 8th century BCE and is called the Greco-Latin epoch, after the peoples responsible for its culture. It was preceded by the epoch of Egypto-Chaldean civilization.
I don't know about the whole 1500 date, but this idea in pre-modern times we were like more of a larger mind, like
you had myths, but like those were not novels. Like no individual person like came up with that. It was with Greek mythology, like Homer didn't make any of that up. They were originally oral traditions. And so they developed, you could say, in this kind of collective way where it's really these beings within the Hellenistic collective unconscious that were really forming these myths, not so much human egos, right? And the same with like, music and that kind of thing. But as we kind of move more towards the present, we see this process whereby individual human creativity is becoming more and more pronounced. Like the first novels came into being in, I believe it was the 18th century, where you first started to see these kind of like love story type novels that were very popular in France.
Like, we didn't really experience individuality in the way that we do today. And like, it was more, particularly in like, you could think like pre-literate, like more towards monkey times.
And so I think what Steiner's saying here is this is a capacity that's developing over time, and I think it's directly related to what he's talking about for these kind of higher faculties of knowledge, because we have to get underneath language, as it were, or above it, maybe is a better way of putting that, into this more purely conceptual realm. And by doing that, that kind of unlocks these creative capacities whereby a person can just sit down and create their own mythology, like Tolkien or George R. R. Martin or whatever the case. But if we're using that not just to create fantasy, but we're actually looking at that as that imaginal faculty as something of epistemological significance, then that's when we can start to kind of break through to the other side, as it were, and really like, look at the stars and start seeing what they're trying to tell us, as it were.
Where we would be like connected via these noetic faculties.
If we go back to those times when we had this sort of hive-like experience of each other, and so what was consciousness? Well, Steiner, right, describes consciousness as a constant revelation pouring into us from the spiritual beings. And we lived in an intelligence that was quite extraordinary, right? I mean, you even look at bees or ants or whatever, you're seeing extraordinary intelligences anyway. Just imagine ours far higher than that, right? And again, no real individual experience of it, but probably a glorious, bliss-filled, unified experience of it together, right? On the other hand, it was also coercive. So when you had these thoughts, they moved you along with everybody else in the ways that they did. So no freedom, but astonishing wisdom. And the exception in this relationship were the initiates. The initiates were very much like, shall we say, we are now. And we're going, oh, look at those people. They thought things were this way. You know what I mean? In this sad, conceited, arrogant, astonishingly narrow-minded way we see the world now. I mean, it's comical. Once you compare it to Steiner's cosmology, it's horrifyingly comical.
Right.
How conceited we are in our breathtaking ignorance and arrogance, right? Which are unfortunately brother and sister in the end of the world. Arrogance and ignorance.
But then we develop the ego, and that's like dissociative identity. With like we've become more focused on our own individual identity rather than the collective identity that we're a part of.
There was this receptivity to these kind of spiritual hierarchies that has gone away, or at least has become significantly diminished over time.
And then now, as we redevelop the noetic abilities while maintaining individuality, then we can re-enter into the larger mind, but in our own fullness or something like that, without having to like sacrifice our individuality or something like that. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's very
Yeah.
interesting. And that also reminds me of astrology, of course, because I think that sometimes with those types of internal things, like at the personal level where people split, I think some of that could be remediated to some degree with astrology in terms of an intentional relationship with these subparts. It's like internal family systems where you like acknowledge the reality of these parts and their interrelations or something. But of course, one has to be very careful not to fall further into dissociation. Like, I don't know. Because I would imagine like sometimes somebody would have a particularly strong transit and it's not working in a causal way, but just there's a pattern happening in their life that like emphasizes one aspect of who they are and like they feel at odds with that aspect or something. I don't know. But yeah, I like that idea. That's interesting. Of God having dissociative identity. Because that's kind of what, the Satan or the death would be like this division, right? It's like dust, disunity, dysteleology, like things are not teleologically organized together. So like the whole idea of the fall being associated with this kind of disintegration of God in a way. That's very interesting. Yeah. Dude, this is I feel like I'm on a bit of a narcissistic like feeling or something. I'm just like, this is so exciting to like, go deep into these. I don't know, like I think this is where, we're on the cutting edge here, in my opinion. I don't know.
I actually found someone on Substack who put this whole idea that I've had in my journal since like, I don't know, 2018. And but it was like perfectly worded and like all laid out. Like they use this analogy of like a spider web with dew on it, and each one of us is like this drop of water.
Hmm.
And I've heard that imagery somewhere else too. I think that that's like some sort of ancient Chinese thing, maybe.
Yeah.
But
Indra's net. I think it was a Hindi thing. I'm not sure though.
mm.
Yeah. Yeah, people be doing that these days. They'll just take ancient concepts and slap new names on them. And
because we've forgotten largely.
You have to have a universe which can communicate with itself holonically. So the entire universe, in a sense, is embedded within every point. This is the multiplex unity or hology principle in the CTMU, and then they're able to communicate with each other because they conform to a global syntax. So every point in the universe shares the same global rules and structure, and they can then semantically transform one another and apply transformations on that intrinsic structure.
But these concepts are so like embedded in our psyches.
Yeah, maybe
that we'll always remember.
Yeah, maybe it's just like to try and get around the kind of taboo. Like people have all these strong associations with like the word God and such,
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
As
You
do
know what I
I.
mean, you know what I mean, though. It's just in terms of like if you say Indra's net from the Hindus, people might not take you seriously or something. Not that we should be pandering to be taken seriously, but
Yeah.
For Thomberg, the world, drowning in materialism, will not be saved by kowtowing to Herod and his people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I made a huge fumble by comparing it to dissociative identity disorder is one thing because it is a disorder in men, but in God, like I cannot attribute any disorder.
I don't know, like it's in a, I don't know, like not, yeah.
Smoking their little jewels, the blueberry flavored air. But anyhow, I digress. But so they discuss galaxies as decentralized networks. It fundamentally understands that it's working together and is aware of itself.
In God, like I cannot attribute any disorder.
God subjects himself to the fall in some way, though, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, like
insofar as he was crucified for it, yeah, and took on the consequences in its fullness.
I don't know. I feel like this is probably beyond us. Yeah, that's very interesting though. No. I guess
That's really, I think, sums it up. Any closing words, final thoughts, concluding meditations?
Yeah. I guess I don't know, maybe that's a good place to call it. And I think the last maybe a good place to end would just be I want to say thank you again for sending me that shirt. I've had it hanging in my closet over there. I can see it all times.
For sure, man.
Owen I'll just go grab it. Owen sent me this base shirt with the cosmogram on it. Shout out Owen.
Yeah, that is a base shirt though. Hold on, that shit is clean.
Shout out Owen. Shout out Griffin. All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll catch you next time. All right, boom.